Hey everybody, this is Donna Knapp. Welcome to ITSM Academy and this month's webinar. If you're not familiar with ITSM Academy, we are a full service provider of IT service management related education. So that includes ITIL, Agile, DevOps, Lean, site reliability, engineering. And relative to this month's webinar, Certified Process Design Engineer, I am super excited about this webinar, and I'm super excited to introduce our speaker this month, Mike Cardinal, who is the Director of Business Transformation and Process Management with Thirdera. But before we let Mike take the reins, I want to tell a quick little story. So 10 years ago, ITSM Academy launched Certified Process Design Engineer, which is based on a book that I wrote and am currently revising called the ITSM Process Design Guide. At the time, Mike Cardinal worked with us, and he was really one of the very first trainers who kind of took the reins and taught the CPDE class. And in order to do that, he had to wrap his head around what was going on in my head when I wrote the book and when I developed the 10 steps. And if he's honest, he'll share that trying to understand the method to my madness was a little scary for him in the beginning. But of course, he quickly caught on and was widely successful and continues to evangelize for CPDE today. And I have to say has really contributed to the body of knowledge that makes up CPDE. If I'm honest, I kind of suck at statistical analysis, which is really actually something that's very necessary if you want to do process improvement and continuous improvement. And so when I need help in that particular area, this is the guy that I go to. So without further ado, let me introduce someone who we very much consider a family member here at ITSM Academy, somebody who I personally very much value as for the collaborative relationship that I have with him in my life and who I count as a friend. So it's all you, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Donna. Yes. And being inside Donna's head 10 years ago was a scary place. It still is a bit of a scary place today, but I've gotten to know her so well, and we are really, really great friends. We meet weekly as much as we can and just, get to know each other and talk CPDE and other things. So a while back, I took a position at the company that I work for called Thirdera. And we're a ServiceNow partner, just for honesty there. And one of the things that I was asked to do is help with some internal operational transformation type work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as I thought about it, and Lisa Schwartz had come to me and said, hey, interested in doing another webinar, which I always am. I said, yeah, I think I've got some stuff going on where I'm making use of CPDE, and I think that would be something good to talk about in taking some of the learning that we get from the Academy and showing people a little bit of how I've used that in a day-to-day world. And I love CPDE. It's to me, like Lisa, my favorite thing about the Academy. It's really my favorite thing in service management world. I love ITIL, I love service management, but CPDE just is so much more special for me. So I thought about, what does a day in the life of CPDE look like? And thus comes this idea of living the CPDE life. All right, so this is me. Many of you know me. If you don't know me, get to know me. This is an old picture. I'm much grayer now, but yeah, I am a CPDE certified user and instructor, educator. I am doing business transformation for Thirdera. So that's just me. All right, so what are we going to talk about? Well, what does a day in the life of CPDE looks like? Well, it looks a lot like most any other work day that someone has, where you start your day with waking up and you hopefully finish with some time of going to bed and refreshing your life. So we're going to kind of walk through that, and we'll talk on each of these topics a little bit and show you how I've used CPDE in the work that I'm doing, and perhaps you can get something out of it for your own work. Use the chat if you have questions. Donna is going to interrupt if it's really relevant, but then we'll also have time at the end of the session. All right, so for those folks on the call who are not familiar with CPDE, just want to do a very quick wrap up or overview of what that is, just to set the stage. So that's waking up, right? What is CPDE? Well, it's a course, right, that Donna and really Joyce Parker, who I think is on the call as well. So hi, Joyce. And they had worked together, in an operational sense a while back, and out of that work then came this idea of doing education on process design. Donna went ahead and wrote a book around it, the Process Design Guide. She created a class. I took hold of that class and began to just make it part of who I am. But the goals of the class, right, and if you haven't taken a class, you've got to take this class, right? This is amazing, right? So learn about different service management frameworks, walk through from that framework perspective how to get people to design, redesign, or improve processes, making use, as Donna said, of measurement and continual improvement, bringing in organizational change, tying that into technologies that can help you automate things and increase those efficiencies or bring greater effectiveness out of that. So it's really a soup to nuts view of what does it mean to design, develop, create, implement, use, and improve processes. It's based in the 10-step model that Donna mentioned in the introduction, which kind of looks like this. And I just gave it some Thirdera colors because we like all sorts of neon at my company. But basically, it's a 4-quadrant model that we use, and I have adopted and gotten a number of my own folks to use as our basic methodology for how we help clients design processes. And it starts with requirements definition. You understand what are the needs of the new process, kind of building that future state. You understand then where they are. That's going into your process analysis and gap analysis. So now you have 2 points on a line, and that's how I describe CPDE. It lays out 2 points on a line. Where are you going? Some point on a maturity curve. Where are you today? And then how do you get from one point to another? So that's that sort of gap analysis. It shows you what's missing. And then it's really, to me, a very simple activity of filling those gaps or prioritizing and filling those gaps. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. And then you sit down as a team and you put together the new process, you build it, and then you implement it, and you put it into a life cycle of continual improvement. And then that leads around to the beginning again, where you gather new requirements. And many of you will notice, if you've been on the Academy webinars, if you've taken an Academy class, if you've talked to anybody related to the Academy, you'll recognize that this in many ways is very much the Deming cycle. There, I said it. Everybody now has to drink some coffee or whatever you are, because we play that game here. Donna said Deming. In this case, Mike playing Donna said Deming. So we're going to use this basic plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, act kind of cycle here, and apply it into process design. Makes life so much easier if we just follow the method and not try and reinvent the wheel. All right, so now that I have everybody's attention in terms of what is CPDE and how does it work in a very quick nutshell, let's talk about how I used it. Well, first off, I went into a situation in this transformation role that I'm in of a little bit of chaos. All right. So I thought, how do I face that chaos without caffeine? I need caffeine. Well, my caffeine was CPDE. All right. So here's a little bit of, as Lisa says, showing a little leg here, right? Revealing what's under the kimono, as it were, about Thirdera. So Thirdera is a company. We're fairly young. We're about 3 years, and we started out as a merger of several different companies. And now over the last couple of years, we're 7 companies that have merged together, all in the ServiceNow space and the process space. And the difficulty was when you bring all of these people together from these various cultures and various companies, and many of you have probably gone through mergers and acquisitions. Everybody sort of has their ways. They have their ways of doing things, and they're comfortable with those ways, and they all feel that those are the best ways because they've been doing it for so long. But what we were facing is this need to identify what is the Thirdera way of doing things. What's the most important way to do things for us as a new organization? And everybody had their ideas, like I said, to what we fix, how we fix it, how we change things, how we implement things. What do we need to do in ServiceNow or in the tools to make all of this work? And everybody just sort of started working on their own thing. And the result was lots of different ways of doing the things that we needed to do internally, particularly operationally. So in looking at this and being asked to kind of come in and help, figure out some of this chaos, and it wasn't like super chaos. I just use that in a sort of metaphorical way. But the answer to me was CPDE. Why reinvent the wheel? Why do something, new and bold and crazy that might not work when I've got a tool set called CPDE that is applicable and usable, and I love it. I know it. I've got a number of other people using it. Now all I have to do is get the whole company using it. So that was kind of my challenge here. All right. So how did we get going with? Well, first we needed a sense of what is it that we're going to try to fix? And for us, what this meant was bringing together what we called the list. So what was the list? Well, the list was over 500 items that we researched, we gathered, we asked people about, and said, what are all the things that you want to do or need to change for us to operate in our most optimal ways as an organization, given that we're bringing 7 different cultures and 7 different operating rhythms together into one. And so this is a little throwback to an old song, if you're familiar, that from a Scottish group called the Proclaimers, and I would improve 500 items, right? So the idea here is look through this whole list, gather it all together, figure out what needs to be improved. And that's a first sort of step in CPDE, is understanding all the requirements. That's what the lists were. The lists were the requirements. So we gathered all of these things that people wanted, and it came to over 500 items. Now, that seems daunting, and everybody was very much like, wow, 500 items, that's a lot for us to do. The thing is, when I started going through the list, there were a lot of duplicates. So we had multiple people and multiple companies doing things, but they were kind of doing it their own way, but ultimately they wanted the same goals out of this stuff. So really, we did not have 5 different asks around, say, demand management. Everybody wanted to use demand management, but they were all kind of doing it a little different. So those all really were not different. They were just the same request. So I needed a way to take all of these things and summarize them and understand what was really there for improvements. And some of them weren't. Some of them weren't really even needs or wants. They were requests that people should have been asking through the system. Just go into the catalog and ask for a request, but they didn't really know how to do that. Maybe their company or their version of things was done differently than that. So I had to sort through all of this. The other thing we found is many things on this list didn't have any kind of formal tracking record. So we use ServiceNow internally. We are a partner, right? But we use that as our own internal operational tool as well. And I went to look and see, did this stuff have some way to manage it inside the tool? And I found that some stuff was in there, but a lot of stuff wasn't. So we had people who were kind of doing things on their own in Excel or Word or OneNote or whatever other format they were using to manage all of that. And in order for us to manage it well, we really needed it in a centralized way. The other issues that we faced, right, there were a lot of pet projects. People were working on things that they thought were important, but they weren't really tied to any kind of operational goals or customer oriented goals or those kind of things. So we had to know, are those things of value or not of value to the organization and our customers? And really, because we were bringing all these methods together, there was no central methodology to all of this. There was no CPDE in place to sort of organize and manage all of these requirements. So first thing I had to figure out is, what is all this stuff? How do I make sense of it? And I needed sort of an operating model to go against, or operating principle. And for me, CPD already offered that. That was in the form of service management frameworks. And in particular, I chose ITIL-ish because some of our processes don't really necessarily exist just purely in ITIL. There's sort of other things that we do that need to attach to ITIL. But that's kind of where we started. So I took, and I'll go through these very quickly. So I took all of the work that we do, and I kind of said, what is it that we do as an organization? And there's really three buckets that I see any organization of our caliber do, right? One is we do execution. This is all of our customer and external facing things, the stuff that brings in the money. Then there's a set of things that we do internally, operational type processes. And then there's a bucket of governance and control and management type activity. So I took all of the ITIL processes and some others and kind of put them together. And you can kind of see some of these things, right? Like sales process is not necessarily a pure ITIL process. Legal is not necessarily a pure ITIL process. So I had to kind of meld the frameworks together, and CPDE says you can do that, right? You can take parts of the various framework, bring them together as you need them. I then mapped it to our flow of selling and producing things for our market. So starting with sales on through closure, the percents represent how likely it is to happen. Right. So the closer we get to actually delivering on work, some of these processes become more prevalent. So I also then did the same kind of thing from an operational standpoint. Now you'll see that some of these are very close. You've got sales management, solution management, practice management. They're very similar to these other ones. The difference is one is the delivery side, right? This is going out and selling things. The sales management is how do you manage the process of selling, right? So that's your internal operational kind of thing. So I had to separate these processes, map all this out, all of the strategic processes that are out there. So I have all of this sort of laid out as a framework that I can map against. And I can take all these 500 items and I can sort and prioritize them just as CPDE says, right? So let's go to that next step. I've now got all of this stuff sort of organized, and that took a long time to do. It's not a quick activity going through 500 individual items and removing duplicates, etc. But now once I had sort of the list, I had to prioritize it. So how did I do that? Well, I took a book page from the CPD book, which indicates that you need to go through and you need to prioritize your process improvements. And I took what Donna had written into the book, and she had a table in the book in the class, and I turned that into an Excel spreadsheet, right? Because it was going to be easier for me to do. So she's got a prioritization matrix in the class. And all I did was take it and make it so I could fill it out a lot easier, right? So what are the drivers or requirements? This is the list of 500 items. Which process do they map to? And then I could go through and score for each one of these items and each one of these processes. Where do they rank in terms of some kind of scoring? Now, Donna in the materials talks about the biggest bang for the buck versus the smallest return. I had to take a little bit of a different tact on that, and that's okay. I had to look at it from how we would align it in ServiceNow, because that tool gives us certain fields that I could fill in. And it works, right? So what we ranked these on was impact, risk, value, and t-shirt size. And again, that's just based a little bit on how the tool works. Your tool or your way of doing it may be a little different, and that's okay, right? But the idea is to have some kind of scoring, because you can't have 700 number one things. And I keep saying this in my own organization, right? You can't have 700 number one things despite what everybody wants. You got to figure out what's the number one thing, what's the number two, number three, so that you know what's important to work on first, second, third. All right. Now, I was a little ambitious. CPDE says just kind of do three at a time. I didn't have that luxury to do three processes. As you saw, I had 30 some odd processes that I had to map to. So it was a big effort and it was a little ambitious, but it worked. Right. So this whole mapping and prioritization thing worked. So I then used sort of a cyclical, my version of the 10 steps in a sense to prioritize things. So I started by what is the list, mapping and sorting those to each of the processes. I then sort of grouped and organized those kind of things, scored and prioritized as I just talked about. And from there, once I knew what the important things were, then I could just simply identify improvement activities or creation or design activities, go out, find people to do the work. This is a tough one, right, in our organization, is finding people who weren't billable out to clients to help do the work, and then implement and rinse and repeat. Right. It's just a nice rinse and repeat kind of cycle as new requirements were coming in, because they were. It wasn't like we said, no more requirements. We could simply follow the same methodology, score them, see if they bumped something down the list or moved up the list, those kind of things. So how did I prioritize in the end? Well, I took all those scores and I basically said, from the scores, what are the most important things? What are the least important things in terms of scoring? And we use the Moscow model, if you're familiar with that. Must, should, could, won't, or wish, or would like, won't get, or would like, will get in the future kind of thing. So what we decided is, above a certain score, these are our musts, right? Or for certain reasons dictated by outside authorities, regulatory, legal, compliance, financial, customer-driven things. These are these things that we have to do. Right? No real choice on those. The next group are all the shoulds, the things that have high priority, but they don't quite reach to that, critical sort of point. The coulds are, hey, these are great ideas, but it's just going to depend on how much time, effort, money it's going to cost. And in the end, can we do that right away? And then these are the things, a lot of what fell into bucket number 4 were the duplicates, or, hey, this doesn't even really belong in this list. This is really a request that you should make to marketing, or this is a request you should make over to IT, or this is whatever. Right. So these are things that we kind of remove. Some of them were just like, yeah, I don't think that's great, but it's never going to happen. Sorry to say. Right. And out of that, then I took those scores, right, from my must, should, coulds, and woulds. And then I looked at, for a process, let's say resource management or capacity management or engagement or project management, what was the average overall score for that process and for that grouping of ideas or items? And what started to emerge is a set of priority groupings. And I know it's a little hard to see here, but what we ended up with is really 10 groupings from P0 down to P9. P0, critical. These are things that had to happen immediately because of a number of things. One of them including a merger with the 7th company that we were merging together. So that had to happen immediately. So those bumped up as criticals. And then what I did was I looked back at ITIL and I said, well, what are common groupings of processes that I can get some economy of scale out of? So although maybe capacity management and talent or skills or capability management overall ranked a little lower, they were very similar to our sort of highest ranking thing here, resource management or staffing. that it made sense to kind of work on those things together. And that's sort of how I got the groupings, right? So engagement management and customer relationship management, demand and some of the others, right? Demand and contracting and those kind of things. And so I just sort of grouped these as the overall order. And so here, instead of having 700 number one things, I had a list ranked from effectively number one to number 500, grouped by process mapping according to ITIL-ish. And now I had a way to set in motion the 10 steps for improving processes. So here's kind of what it looks like when with the numbers, right? So I took 500 work items. I then grouped those or matched those to 32 programs or processes that we need to have or do. I took those and put those into those 10 portfolio or priority groupings. Now I had some way to put out in front of people the list, the order, the ranking, what we should tackle first, what should we tackle second. Okay. So now I had out of that 6 things that we had to do. Those were those super critical things, including merging a new organization. But it was also things for project management and for knowing what skills our folks had. We're a consulting organization, so we have to know that we're putting the right people in the right work. But this applies to any company, right? You could putting the right things out there for the right reasons. And then working on making use of tools for better project estimation and those kind of things. 129 shoulds, those included that sort of next level down in some of the groupings like capacity and resource management, which is really staffing onto projects and those kind of things. But it also included some of these other areas. And then 175 coulds included improvements to Thirdera University, what we call 3EU Thirdera University, our internal training capabilities, and then improving things like notifications and reporting, all of those down the road. Now, are there individual items in some of these things that are really, really important? Absolutely, there are individual items. But as a whole, that one item I could treat as higher. But as a whole, some of these other things like reporting or notifications just don't rise to that highest level. So this really, the effect of this on people is that they start to recognize that what they see in their world as most important doesn't necessarily translate to most important for the organization or for our customers. And it's a real eye opener. So don't forget about the OCM aspect of service management and of CPDE, because that's important. I'll talk about that. Recognize this. This is just all the new stuff. This didn't even include all of the stuff that was just keeping the lights on work. So when we put the whole thing together, the whole list of items is between 700 and 800 desires or needs or wants or ideas or demands that people have. It's a lot, and you can't tackle it all at once. Okay? So this is kind of the just a sample of the scoring sheet that I use. So I would indicate what initiative there was. So in one, someone said capacity planning process needs to be improved. Another person said resource plans, which is how we associate people to projects, time card, etc. I then map those to priority categories and processes. So you can see this is basically the groupings in the second column. These are the individual processes that go with that. And then now I could know what I needed to focus on for improvement using CPDE. You can see some of these things had records, some of them didn't. So I'd have to go out and create records to be able to track them. Some might lead to changes in the tool. Others were just process changes. And then I had to know sort of where they were in a life cycle. Right? Because again, you can't do all of these at once. You sort of need this life cycle to track these. A bunch of other columns around the scoring and other things. And then what I did, so each one of these is for an individual grouping of processes. How did I decide which individual rows ended up on each tab? Well, I went through and I said, of the 3 areas, capacity, resourcing, or talent, or of these 3 processes, which one does this really hit the most? Where does it have the greatest impact? And this is, again, bringing in a little bit of that CPDE idea that Donna had laid out, where you want to know which processes are being impacted the most by these changes. Where are you going to get your biggest bang for your buck? So for this, capacity planning really fell not only to capacity, but resourcing. Right. So I could put that onto resourcing. I also have it on capacity management, but I could put it on resourcing. And then these tabs are organized from most priority to least priority. So I could hand this over to somebody and say, you want to know what's number one, just go to the first tab, look at the first row. That's your number one item. And then I could sort this all very easily. All right. So did all this work, months and months and months of this work. Now came the hard part, as I just said, getting everybody on board with this. How do we get people to jump in and help and start to change the way they think and change how they do their work and recognize that everything can't be number one? So what we did was we created an internal program that we called Orion, and our CEO, Jason Moyan, came up with this acronym or abbreviation here. So Orion, we just started it as a star theme, but space theme, but he came out that it meant outstanding, reliable, innovative, organized, and nimble. And so we coupled OCM with CPDE right from the beginning by building this program to get the word out, to talk about what it means to improve things internally. We call ourselves aeronauts. So if you work for Thirdera, you're an aeronaut. It kind of goes with the space theme and allows us to kind of move everything forward by having that importance OCM activity coupled with the process design activity. And we started this very early. I'm talking about it a little bit further into the presentation, but we actually started it very early as we started this transformation journey. And it's really brought a lot of value. People are really changing their thinking, changing the way they behave, recognizing what process is, how you use process, how you use the tool to enable process, metrics, as Donna talked about, quality, right? So these four areas became very important. And without even realizing it, the gentleman that I work with that kind of started putting this together, I said, you know, you just built a balanced scorecard here. So that's the idea, is our program outcomes, again, using tools like CPDE and others. We just said, okay, let's put together this balanced scorecard to see how well we're doing, because it's a very important part of CPDE, is knowing, does your process work or not? Right. So what are we going to do from a day-to-day perspective? Well, we needed guiding principles, and just like service management, just like ITIL has its set of guiding principle, focus on value, we felt it was important to have a set of guiding principles with this and tie it then to what we were doing in terms of transformation and process design. So you'll notice the foundational piece here is a process first approach. So we're going to use CPDE, and we're going to use process as the way that we improve things and build things going forward. We're going to make sure that we are communicating. And I love and have stolen from Donna the idea of communicate, communicate, communicate. If you think you've communicated enough, double your effort. Right there, you cannot communicate this stuff enough, right? And constant, and you could call it a barrage, but a constant in your face kind of, hey, we're doing this. And it was great because people started associating this term Orion with continual improvement and operational efficiencies and effectiveness. So it was great outcome that way, because we're distributing and making people aware, and that goes on even today. A single place, right? Trying to go global, breaking down the regional groupings and building the bridges across regions. We're in North America, Latin America, EMEA, APAC, trying to get all of these groups and all of these companies working together with a single one Thirdera way of doing it, breaking down those structures. And then the organizational change side of it, coupling with the distribution of information, training people, educating people, all of these things, giving them voices, and keeping in mind sort of our overall principles of, and these really come from our values: clients above all, people first. This is how we do it, right? So tying all of this together. So very, very important if you're going to use CPDE to not forget about the OCM aspect. All right, so now we've got the people side moving along. How do we go about redesigning some of these processes? Well, I just took the 10 steps and I started following them. They're very simple. They're very straightforward. You follow them in order. They provide the results that you're looking for. Many of you may not know this gentleman, but many, many years ago when I first started teaching CPDE, I had the opportunity to go train and work with some folks from a company called NAVMISA, the Navy Information Medical Systems Association. And one gentleman, Andrew Wilson, who has moved on to great things from then, fell in love with CPDE, and he showed me the possibility of what it could do. So they took CPDE and did the same kind of thing that I'm doing, used it to put in place process design. And simply by following it in order, they were able to see a 92% drop in the amount of time it took to design, implement, and produce processes. 92%. Right. And somewhere I have that data and all of that he talked about. But it was amazing. I'm like, this stuff works. This is great. I've got to be able to use this. And throughout my career, I hadn't really been able to make great use of it as a practitioner, mostly as a trainer. But now I had this opportunity. So that's what I did was I took the 10 steps and I started using them. And I'm trying to get other people and have been working on getting other people just follow the 10 steps, right? It's laid out. So one of the things that 10 steps has us do is document processes. So what I started to do is create process documentation. I started by putting together a high-level integration diagram, one of our process maps that comes out of CPDE, or the need to do this. And it started to show me the interactions and the integrations and the connections between processes. And I could kind of see, again, this helped me with the grouping. So I could see, and resource management is right here in the middle. I could see that there's sort of this backbone that of information flow for us. Resource management kind of sits at the heart. We saw that as a very important thing that needed a lot of work. Way too much manual staffing of people, not enough use of automation to help us and enable that. That then coupled with things like talent management and capacity. So I could kind of start to see these groupings, and that's what the white is these sort of natural groupings of processes together. So again, if you're looking to use CPDE, I'm bold. I've been doing this a while. I was willing to jump in and try do this whole map, but I would do this kind of integration map and then kind of put groupings together and go, let's tackle this group first. Let's not try to tackle everything. And I'm sure in your own organizations, and we see this with clients when they come to us, and I remember a famous I think it was an RFP from the government, and they said, we want to do 10 ITIL processes in 3 months. I just laughed. I'm like, there's no way you're going to do that, right? One bite at a time. That's how you get this elephant eaten. So don't try to overdo it, but start with this map so you know where you're going. From there, I then took resource management and I laid out, all right, what does a high level process for resource management look like? And this is a mix of ITIL and ServiceNow approach. So it's blended. Yes, it's blended. It's not necessarily some pure ITIL thing, but that works. And I kind of laid out in what my boss calls a straw mat, really straw man. He misunderstood what I was talking about when I talked to him about it. So in this straw mat, laid out, okay, what are the high level steps? Now, could you do this as a flow chart? Certainly. Could you do this in other forms? Yes. I like this format because it kind of lays out for me visually, but also linear, kind of what are the steps, easy to do in a tool. I use Miro, but you could do this in Mural, you could do this in Visio, you could do this in any number of other tools to just kind of sort this out. And this gives me a way to show people future state process, right? This is where we're kind of going without all of the detail, without worrying about decision making and some of those, right? So started to lay out this resource management plan. every time I did one of these, so I've done this several times now with processes, I always take this same set of measurement steps. I take this same set of continual improvement, and there's our Deming cycle kind of again. So go ahead and drink your coffee, and just those become repeatable kind of things. And this sort of approach where I'm just sort of repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. This is the beauty of CPDE. You start the ever present or the nonstop machine, and you just let it roll. All right, so how did we, once I had the processes defined, and how did we get people to start using it? Well, again, we weren't trying to make this perfect. I love and have really adopted a new aspect of CPDE that Donna and I had talked about many, many years ago as she started to learn about Agile and Kanban and those things, and I kind of came a little bit later to that. But this idea of minimal viable process, right? This idea that you don't have to have it perfect out of the gate. That machine of the 10 steps will get you down the road to greater maturity. So rather than try to scramble and get this process perfect, get something set up in a tool, I said, let's just do this as simple as possible. So somebody went out and using MS Forms and Teams, we use Teams, they put an escalation intake in. So we have an escalation process that when a project needs, say, more money, or a project needs, there's an unhappy customer, or a project needs to be extended, or whatever change or whatever escalation there is that's needed, they simply go out, fill out this basic form. That then becomes an input to the process that we designed around that. We gather that information into a spreadsheet, and we use that to assign an escalation analyst to each of the projects to help coordinate and manage, and that can be a CPDE type person, to help coordinate and manage all the stuff around this escalation. Now, sometimes that means very hands-on. You got to herd all the cats and get everybody working together and kind of focus people. Others of these escalations are simply like, okay, I'm going to be in the background. I'm going to capture lessons learned because the project manager seems to have things in hand. This is just a way for us to then lead to the fourth quadrant of CPDE and do continual improvement. Right. So we have a way of capturing this very simply. We didn't have to go through a lot of stuff. Eventually, will we move this into something like ServiceNow? Certainly. And my thought is, well, an escalation is just an incident for a project. So let's just in the future use incident management. So being smart guy that I am, Mike said, let's set up the escalations process to mirror incident management. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't recreate this stuff. Just go and map it to an existing ITIL process and say, is an escalation simply a different form of incident? Yes, it is. Let's just use the incident management process. So if you were to see the whole process, you'd kind of like, oh, okay, that looks like incident because it is incident with different words. This is the beauty of things like ITIL and CPDE, right? Steals shamelessly, Don always says. So once I had those processes kind of working and in place and going, now how do you keep it going, right? How do you get that cycle moving? And with the continual improvement cycle, right, that is the hardest question. How do we keep this going? How do we, keep everybody moving forward and not resting on their laurels or thinking, okay, well, we got a process in place and now we're done. We never have to mature. Right. So that's where we use this whole Orion program that I talked about to continue on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to keep people moving along. That's where that OCM aspect and that improvement aspect really come into place. So we started to establish governance around all of this. We started to put things in terms of a shared calendar so that people knew when certain conversations were going to happen and when meetings were going to happen around these improvements. We got a team structure in place to be able to make decisions and make governance calls and to establish process ownership and all the things that go along with all of this. We kept people informed in short bursts. Instead of trying to say, here's a year's roadmap, we decided to do a 3-week rolling plan. It ended up being a 5-week rolling plan. People wanted a little bit more than 3, but that works. And we didn't have to set up one of these gigantic 1 year, 10-year roadmap kind of things that gets changed as soon as you create it. We're building the roadmap as we do it, right? And that's a lesson I took from CPDE. And everybody's working off of that same list. Now that we've established it, people know if they want new things, there's a method that they ask for. We make use of ServiceNow to do that, but you could just as simply, like I showed you, create a simple form where somebody says, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could do X, or just have them, create a catalog item and have them submit a request to do something new, right? And then reinforcing that we are there to support and be there with them as transformation people, as CPDE, as OCM folks, so that they know that we're serious about all of this. Okay. And so by having that sort of multi-phase minimal viable product move down in maturity, we're able to achieve all of these things, right? So we had a combined global effort going here. Everybody was aligned to the same priorities. Has it changed? Had the priorities changed over time? Yes, but it's nice because the scoring method allows us to simply go back in, rescore things with new information, redo the list very easily, at least the top of the list, and continue to improve. And so we've seen some improvements. We've seen actually a drop in the number of escalations out of this, not because there are fewer escalations, but people know what to do now in terms of an escalation. So if there's an issue with a project, or if there's something where we need to go back to a client with a change order, or we need to do whatever, they have methods instead of just floundering. And what was happening is people were just spinning up the whole organization in a panic mode. I have always said, and will continue to say, there is no such thing as panic mode in service management. There is simply processes to be improved, problems to be solved, incidents to be resolved. You do them, you move on, right? No panic, no craziness, no tornadoes, get rid of all that. And then, pump people up, celebrate it. When we're doing great things, that's what we do. All right, so how do we prepare for a new day? Well, this is what we're doing next step. So we've continuing to sort of follow the methodology. We're adding in governance. I'm in charge of that, so I'm adding governance in slowly. I was a little ambitious with that. I'm an ambitious kind of idealistic futurist kind of guy. I'm like, let's just put it in place and make it happen. Yeah, not happening as fast as I would like, but it is starting to get there. And at least the conversations around governance are starting. We really had our first win over the last couple weeks with this. Is I got everybody to agree on a very simple naming convention around some stuff, which I thought was great. And it's a small start, but that's what CPDE is about, right? Minimal viable kind of stuff, then move forward, couple it with agile and lean thinking. Continued prioritization of the work and new stuff that's coming in. Some things have been bumped down the list. Other things have become more critical priorities. And you just have to live with that, right? That's how it goes. That's part of ITIL. Continued process design. So we've done escalations process. We're working on a global resourcing management process. We've done a continual satisfaction, or a customer satisfaction process, and a couple others, right? So really making some headway on some of these priorities. And then looking at how we can make better use of a tool like ServiceNow. So I'm cleaning up some data, because part of the problem was people were just throwing data in and using it the way they used to use it. And that was part of where that naming convention, I had to have a way of differentiating stuff in the tool that was internal versus stuff that we were using for client work. And so I needed a naming convention to help me do searches. So these are our next steps. These are things that I'm currently working on. Again, aligning it very much to CPDE and just following it. I give Donna feedback on this. I've been telling her about this work. I've showed her what I've done. And hopefully, some of these real world experiences that I've gone through and making use of the methods will be applicable to each of you in some way. And sometimes people say, oh, those classes and those certs and those, it's all just shelfware, and people go just take the test and they go back to the way they're doing it. I didn't. I took the test. I fell in love with it. I got the cert. Yeah, that's a proud moment for me and a banner in my life. But more importantly, I saw how practical this is. And when I had that opportunity to make use of it, took a long time. It has had just absolute amazing benefits, even in about the 6 months that I've been making use of it. So that's what I've been doing. That's my day in the life of CPDE. Yeah, let's turn it over for questions or comments.
It helps when you unmute. Well, I'll go back to that slide because actually our first question that came in relates to that. So first of all, Christopher mentioned common vocabulary is very important, and that popped up when you were talking about naming standards. But really, just like we promote, if we were teaching an idle class, we'd emphasize the importance of common vocabulary there. There is a vocabulary that you can apply to process design and improvement. And that's a big part of what this is all about as well, is having this shared understanding of the fact that there is a process for designing and improving processes, and there's a vocabulary that goes along with that. But the question, Mike, that got asked by Mark was, are you using a governance framework?
So, as I generally do, thanks for the question, Mark. As I generally do, I started with a loose touch to ISO, just very loose. And then I've kind of done my own little kind of framework. So it's not pure, a little bit, think of it like a recipe, a little bit of COBIT, a little bit of some other things thrown in. So it's not a pure governance framework. If you have a favorite one, I think they all add some stuff, right? I used one actually. I have this governance framework that I pulled from outside IT that talks about big G governance versus little g governance. Big G is your, compliance stuff. Little g is made up of 4 factors for governance: accountability, transparency, participation, and predictability. So that's kind of what I base most of my governance stuff on. Is that sort of little g governance for this kind of work. And yeah, that's kind of, it's not a pure answer. So hopefully that gets you what you're looking for.
So I'm going to ask a question. So anybody else, if you have questions, please go ahead and send them in. I'm going to ask a question based on a conversation you and I have like all the time, I think, is, this whole conversation about process and tool alignment. And, I know you live in the ServiceNow world, so it's tough, right? Because, there's very often this, I don't know, thought process that, okay, we've, the leadership has signed the check, we've bought the tool, and let's go forth and install that tool. But really, there are so many decisions that you need to make in order to use that tool effectively. And those decisions very often translate back into your processes, right? What you're doing within the confines of your processes. So what kind of words of wisdom would you give to folks around kind of those activities?
Yeah, let me go back to the resource management diagram, because I think this is a good sense of it, right? So in ITIL 4, they're now talking about workforce management and that, which is great. I think it's something that's been missing, but they've never really had that pure sort of staffing side. So I had to find that balance between the way that ServiceNow has interpreted that kind of process and implemented it in their tool, and adhering to a more best practice idea. So what you can kind of see is I start every sort of process design, whether there's an existing process in terms of ITIL or COBIT or other frameworks, Verisim or whatever. But I always think in my back of my mind, that Deming cycle, right? Of, okay, first thing that happens in any process is some kind of planning thing. And then there's some doing stuff, and then there's some checking stuff, and there's some acting stuff. So I found a nice blend between ITIL like, right, and the way that they do it in ServiceNow. So in ServiceNow, if you're not familiar with it, right, you move a person through these 4 phases. You start by planning, right? What is the work they're going to do? You ask for that resource to be assigned. You kind of soft lock them in so people aren't stealing that person. And then you put them in on the project so that they can actually report time. So that's the key, right? That's the answer is start with your ITIL processes or your service management framework processes on one end. On the other end of the line is whatever tool you're using, Remedy or Sherwell or ServiceNow or whatever, right? Homegrown, and then find the middle point. It's about balance. I'm all about balance in my life. So find that middle point where is it perfect how ServiceNow or whatever tool has done what they've done? No. Can I live with it? That's
Yeah.
a question for collaboration too. That's my mark of collaboration, right? And cooperation or consensus. Consensus doesn't mean I get everything I want and Donna loses. What it means is I can live with some of what Donna wants. Donna can live with some of what Mike wants, and we find a common ground. And it's the same way with your tool and your process. What can you live with together? And for this kind of thing, yeah, I can live with this. This works. It doesn't, to me, violate best practices. It also doesn't force me to change the tool a whole lot.
Right. And we sometimes, Mike, you and I use the word inform, that if you can let frameworks inform how you think about processes and let your tool inform how you think about how then you're going to execute that process, so that you're not starting with a clean slate of paper, right? You're recognizing the fact that you're gonna you're gonna have to live with certain things, right? Because they are what they are. Or you're going to have to completely reinvent your tool and reinvent your processes, which never makes sense in this day and age. Let all of those things inform your decision making, and like Mike said, figure out where that middle ground is. And Mike, I think you and I over the years have changed the way we think about that, because we've just seen how organizations would spend so much time and effort customizing their tools only to have those tools look exactly like the way they've always done things.
Right. Yeah.
So you've not necessarily designed or re-engineered your process. You've just let your tool tell you how to do things. So, all right. So what was the largest hurdle you faced by the organization? And were there areas in particular that you had to bring on board and convince?
Yeah.
What helped you do that? We always talk about executive sponsorship. Were they on board, or a group to convince?
Yeah. So the biggest hurdle there were really two equally big hurdles. The first big hurdle was as soon as the list was done and scored and organized, people said, yes, we all agree resource management is the number one priority, but and there it came, right? But this thing is more important. Okay, that kind of destroys the whole idea of you agreeing that this thing is number one. And that's where the P0 came from, right? Was, yeah, but these things are critical. Okay. And every time somebody wants to add something to the critical list, my question always is, but what comes off the list, right? What gets bumped down? Because you can't just make everything critical because you don't like the list. So that was one hurdle. Where did that hurdle come from? Organizational change, right? People's resistance to do new things and do things differently and accept that their way of doing things isn't the only way of doing things. So that was the second equal hurdle, was convincing people to think and act and behave differently. And I have always said, above everything, ITIL, CPDE, COBIT, IT for IT, every one of these things, behavioral modification systems. Yes, they come with processes. Yes, they come with tools and capabilities. But ultimately, you're changing the way that people think, act, behave. And that was the hardest, that still is the hardest part, right? Is getting people to recognize that you have to commit to this stuff. And I love it that in the very first step, and so many people skip this step, the very first step of the 10 steps, get management committed. Right. That's a joke that I always make with that. I love that, Donna. I can make that joke, right? Have management committed. Now, you want to get that vision and that management commitment that they're going to do this. And that was really hard for us, is getting people to kind of commit funding, commit people, commit time, commit effort, commit to change. Those are the answers.
And, let's recognize that it's easier said than done. I mean, I did state of earlier this year, and whether you're talking about IT service management, agile, DevOps, management support and management commitment almost always rises to the top of, what are the greatest challenges that we face. So I think some of this comes down to also just kind of learning to wrap your head around what are, in fact, the strategic priorities of your organization, and being always able to point to those. So when everybody says, but wait, I know you said that's the number one priority, but can we do my thing first? Your answer can be, well, how does your thing tie into, overall strategy and overall organizational?
Correct. Yep.
Right.
And I hate to do this to you, Don. I do have a hard stop. I appreciate all the questions and everybody's paying attention. Anybody reach out to me. My contact information is always available, or through the Academy. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I have a busy day today with lots of obligations around all of this stuff. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna let you kind of take back the screen, and thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Love doing these webinars. And again, reach out to me on all the socials. Love to talk.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And as always, you can go to itsmacademy.com to learn about CPDE and any of our other courses. We're super excited. The ITIL practice bundles are coming up. We're getting ready to launch in November. So hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today.